I want to get into precise details about your strategic plan and what I call your story in numbers. So earlier we've been talking about your story in words. That's the story that gets people excited and attracted to what you're doing. But somebody who wants to put resources into your project is going to want to have a more granular picture of what you want to achieve and how you're going to do that. So we want to start with a 3-year strategic plan. And one of the biggest mistakes, actually two of the biggest mistakes I made, was giving myself a 10-year plan. I did that twice, and that's a huge mistake. And the reason that it's a big mistake is that our natural tendency to procrastinate, if we have too long term of a vision, of a too long of a time frame to get there, shall we say, the long-term visions are fine, but the thing is that we actually, when we compress the time frame, what we do is then we start discovering faster ways to get there. So I would rather say I want to be a billionaire in 2 years, and if I fail at that, I will have learned something, and then the next 2 years I'll be able to apply that. If I say I want to be a billionaire in 10 years, probably you won't hit the failure point until about year 8 or 9. And so, because getting to the billionaire status is about acquiring assets, creating assets or acquiring assets. That's really the two basic activities. So, people think about, well, I want to make money. Look, making money is great. And you have to make money if you want to be a billionaire. But the thing is, when we just focus on that, just making money, like you can't really say I make $1 billion. I mean, you can, and there are maybe some star athletes that have gotten to their $1 billion, net worth just from, revenue. Like I don't know if let's say you got $100 million a year podcast contract. Well, straight out 10 years, that'll be $1 billion. Or you take that money and you invest it and you shorten the time frame. But right, so now you're taking that income, but you still, if you want to get there faster, you're going to be deploying money to create assets. And people talk about Warren Buffett, for example. Oh, the world's greatest investor. I mean, yeah, he's a good investor, but he didn't get rich by being a great investor alone. He got wealthy by leveraging other people's money. His first activity when he got out of college was he created an investment fund with a bunch of doctors and dentists in Omaha, where he lives, who, they were making piddly returns on their savings, and these guys didn't want to learn how to be a great investor. So he said, "I'll invest your money for you." So he got wealthy by acquiring assets to manage, which was the assets of these other people who had acquired their assets by earning it in their day job. All right, so now we're clear. We need to have a plan where we're creating the asset value, and that's going to be a mix of income and cash flow, but also that acquisitional aspect. All right, so now let's get to the nitty-gritty. How do you create a strategic plan really fast? It has two purposes. One is it helps you kind of get a sense of whether your plans are any good, right? And so that's why I call it your story in numbers, because at the end of the day, if the numbers don't add up on paper while you're modeling your strategy, probably it's not going to work when you execute it either. And so business modeling is just so important to achieving anything of any real merit. Otherwise, you're kind of just a peddler, or, an opportunist, as opposed to a strategist. All right, so how do we do this? Well, at most, we'll take a 3-year vision, and you map out that 3-year vision in annual milestones. And you can use a spreadsheet to do this. But at the top of the spreadsheet, what you're really doing is taking your story in words and turning it, so the column headers for each year are the major milestones. So that's another story in words. And then underneath that, you're going to look at what kind of income will you be generating, and when in time. So now you're mapping out cash inflows in time, and then the cost to generate that revenue. And depending on what you're trying to do, you might need to do capital expenditures. So they call that CapEx. So you might say, well, I want to, I want to build a widget factory, and that's going to cost money, but you don't have the money. And that's where most people just say, well, I can't do it because I don't have the money, and they stop. And what I want you to do in this case is not concern yourself about the cash flow projections of your project. Everyone wants to show that it's all positive. Boot up Excel and show some kind of hockey stick growth curve. And yeah, you might, you want that, but you want to get really honest with exactly when you would need the money and how much, in what time frame and sequentially to get to your goal. And probably if the project is bigger than something you can finance yourself, you're going to show negative cash flow, at least at the beginning. And how do you remedy that negative cash flow? By acquiring cash from other people. It's called raising money or raising capital. There's a lot of different ways to do that. So now what you've got is this story. Okay, here's where I want to be at the end of year one. Here's where I want to be at the end of year two. Here's where I want to be at the end of year three. And you start mapping out well, maybe this company's not going to make money until the beginning of year two. So you've got no income. But you have expenses like, okay, we need to acquire materials. We need to hire a designer, things like that. And so, you want to get to this story in numbers. And now at the bottom, between your income, your expenses, your operating expenses, and your CapEx, your capital expenditures, now you've got a total cash flow story. It's like, wow, okay, well, we're negative $1 million in year one. What are we going to do about that? So that's where you design financial strategies, financial products, what I call inspiration products. They might be, raising capital. They might be getting money from grants, raising donations, raising recurring donations for your own salary. That's, the Make My Nut program teaches you how to take your story in words and story in numbers and turn it into money that allows you to now have the time and resources to go out and, if you need to raise capital or whatever you need to do to execute on your plan. So rather than coming from it from this point of view, it's like, well, I have to get rich first before I can try this. Instead, you're taking that billionaire mindset of, okay, how am I going to acquire the assets I need to fulfill my vision? When do I need those assets? So that's where now you've got your story in numbers is a timeline. So it's not just a vision detached from reality, but you're giving it more reality by giving a dollar cost to get to where the business can sustain itself. And here's a classic example, just really simple. Let's say I don't know, you found some old apartment building that's for sale, but it needs a bunch of renovation. And you don't have the money for the apartment building, and you don't have the money for the renovation. And during that time, it's going to be vacant and not making any money. So it's all risk. But you can see in that neighborhood that once the thing is built out, it'll be generating a certain kind of revenue from rent. So this is the most basic thing, and this happens every day. This is how people do real estate. So, well, you acquire equity partners who are going to be willing to take the risk. Like, you just don't go out and borrow money because the company, that apartment building has no cash flow. If you borrow money, now you're responsible for monthly payments out of money that you don't have. So you raise equity, a shared ownership. And then you raise that equity, buy the building, do the renovations, get the renters, and now you've got cash flow. Out of that cash flow, you can then acquire a loan from a bank, if maybe in 2 years you wait for the project to get seasoned, that's what they call that, the bank seasoning, and borrow money from a bank and use that to pay back your equity investors with some kind of a profit, or you convert your equity investors into private debt holders. So, but what you can see is this is how you get over the fact that you don't have the money to build that business, in this case, the apartment building business. And pretty much every other business in the world is the same basic balancing between equity and cash flow, so that it's called acquiring the money that you need to get things done. So that's the basic strategic plan. It's just a timeline, and doing this will really help you find where you don't have the resources. So you're looking for constraints. The point of a strategic plan is to look for any kind of constraints in time, people, money, resources, and identify them before you start raising capital. And you can raise capital with a bad plan. I've done it a lot, actually, because I didn't know what I was doing and nobody else knew how to do what I was doing. So I just, was going for it. And there are people who were willing to give me money just to try and figure out how to do it. But I recommend that instead of doing it that way, you do, work with me and make a much better plan, and also avoid all the mistakes I made while I acquired resources. And we won't, I think I've got a lot of videos on all the mistakes I've made, so I'm not going to go into those here. All right, so that's more granular detail about your strategic plan. Again, I call it your story in numbers, and the combination of your story in words and your story in numbers is what really will set the stage, allowing you to acquire all the resources that you need to fulfill your dream.